which is why they're not wearing sneakers? Don't understand that. Okay. Oh, their jeans are tucked into their boots. Okay, still don't get that. Okay. They had some negative things to say about the non-sneaker wearing group. Okay, here are these are the non-sneaker women over here talking about the sneaker group and why the heck they're wearing sneakers. They are much more balanced, and if anything, they wrote more positive things. Let's hear some of the positive things. They wrote, they walk a lot, so that's why they're wearing their sneakers. They're comfortable. They match everything. Boots are too much work. The sneakers are easy. They're convenient. It's the first pair of shoes they saw this morning. They like tying. Reminds them of when they were athletes. Okay, we're stretching there. So the good old days when I was an athlete, okay? Okay, so those were kind of positive, kind of weird, and kind of neutral. Okay, here's some negative things. They were lazy this morning. They forgot something. Shoes at home. Oh, they forgot their shoes at home. They look athletic. That's sarcastic. Ooh, they look athletic. Okay, maybe, I just can't read that. Okay, negative things. Oh, they were lazy this morning. The only shoes they care about, forgot shoes, over break. They look, now it's the look part, look athletic. Dog chewed up their other shoes, only pair of shoes they have. They got feet problems. Okay, what was I thinking might happen, which sort of happened in this exercise? What's the idea? What happens when you start thinking about people in terms of in-groups versus out-groups, in terms of us versus them?
When you think of the other group as a then more negative.
Yeah, you start, the thing about our nature, actually universally, is we tend to act in ways that favor, or judge people, evaluate ways that favor the in-group. And this is known as in-group favoritism. It is an enormously robust effect in social psychology that can happen on the basis of silly things like blue eyes and brown eyes in Jane Elliott's classroom, like sneakers and non-sneakers in our classroom. The in-group favoritism effect, a tendency to discriminate in favor of in-groups over out-groups. I don't know if the observers can comment on this or any of the people who participated. What I've read about this exercise is that things start out pretty tame and they slowly become more negative. I don't know if that was your experience at all. Yes? Did it slowly become more negative? So, some of these things are pretty negative. I think the negative things, though maybe not as many as I was hoping to see, are more negative than the positive are positive. The positive seem a lot more neutral to me. In the laboratory, how do we demonstrate that in-group favoritism effects emerge? And how do we show that it has to do with this categorization of in-group versus out-group? Okay? The way they have done it in social psychology, and it's a brilliant, clever paradigm, and the reason why that's the case I'll explain in a minute, but it's called a minimal group paradigm. And it's far more minimal than sneakers versus non-sneakers. That is, the basis of the group membership that they create in the laboratory is arbitrary, meaningless, minimally important. It's a paradigm in which people are categorized according to arbitrary, minimally important similarities, like sneakers versus non-sneakers. Okay, like you are the A group versus the B group. Okay, it's not like we're talking about blacks and whites, Christians and Jews, Cal students and Stanford students, men and women. We're talking about your group and A, your group B. You wear sneakers, you didn't today. These are minimally important arbitrary differences to create an in-group, out-group. Why is that a good thing to use that kind of basis to examine in-group favoritism? Why is that a bad thing? Do you find this to be methodologically a clever thing to do or a problematic thing to do? You've got something to say. You're shaking your head? It is clever because even on the basis of something so trivial, like whether you're group A or group B, people still show in-group favoritism. And it's not a in-group, out-group difference that's based on centuries of history of struggle between blacks and whites, between Cal students and Stanford students. It is based on something arbitrary. It is purely in-group, out-group categorization. And yet you can still find these effects. It really can then show, given how trivial and arbitrary the distinction is, that it has to do with this in-group versus out-group categorization, and that's it. Now the downside, what's the downside to using this kind of paradigm? Yeah. Yeah. External validity. He's saying, sure, that's great, but in the real world there are real reasons, or perceived real reasons, for why there's animosity between different groups. And those reasons, you're saying, let's say scarcity of resources, let's say occupation of territory, land, whatever, there are real reasons, religious intolerance and so forth that matter. That has an impact on how people react. So on the one hand, you have an enormous internal validity in the sense that you're really pinpointing that it's just mere in-group, out-group categorization at the serious potential cost of out-group, external validity. Yeah?
Would you say that something this simple as that over time could be as serious as something like race? Because even in the beginning, like just being black and white, there wasn't really that big of a difference, just a skin color, but it turned into something way more serious. And I wonder, like, if throughout time, if we were to separate those groups permanently, if they would actually become that serious.
You mean like arbitrary groups? Could they become? Yeah, I think they could. I mean, this is what happens when you form friendship groups or cliques in grade school or something like that. Over time, they get more cemented. They get characteristics, norms, values. Groups become formed and have an identity that's not arbitrary, that's not contentless, that's actually full of meaning and content. And it can go either way. And, everybody liking each other or becoming more, more distinct from one another and strife between the groups. Absolutely. Okay, they don't do that in these studies. They're not looking at the impact of minimal based differences over time. But I am going to tell you about a study that looked at that kind of thing in the real world, so I'll get back to that. Okay, so let me give you an example of the minimal group paradigm in action. This is Henri Tajfeld, and his students are responsible for a lot of this work. The arbitrary basis of in-group, out-group distinction in the study had to do with dots. Okay, participants in the study, you come into the lab, you're flashed these images of a lot of dots on the screen, and you're asked to guess how many dots are on that screen. 25, 62, whatever. It's a really hard task to do on purpose because afterward they want to tell you that based on your responses, you tend to be an overestimator of dots, or based on your responses, you tend to be an underestimator of dots. This is really not that important. I mean, who cares if you underestimate or overestimate dots? But participants are divided into in-groups and out-groups on that basis. And then for convenience sake, they're given an opportunity later on to allocate points to other people in the experiment, some of whom are their in-group members and some of whom are out-group members. And I should say that these points are not meaningful points. They're not necessarily related to money or some sort of perk. Okay? And yet you see in-group favoritism in the sense that participants gave their fellow over or underestimators of dots more points, experimental points, than the other group. So if I'm an overestimator, I gave more points to my fellow overestimators and less to those weird underestimators of dots over there. Okay? Minimally important, and yet still can have these kinds of effects on people's likelihood of favoritism and discrimination. Okay? What you should be thinking about, I know it's very intuitive because we've all felt this way before and do perhaps daily, but why does this happen? Why do we favor us over them? Why do we show in-group favoritism even on the basis of something so arbitrary like under and overestimator status? There are various explanations for this. One of the most prominent has to do with social identity theory. Okay, this is a theory that Tajfeld and his student John Turner developed, and their argument was one, okay, we all know we categorize the world in terms of in-groups and out-groups. Men, you're one of us women, you're one of those men. You're one of those Cal students, you're one of those Stanford students, what have you. We divide the world as, are you part of us or are you part of them? And we derive self-esteem from our social identities. I mean, you're proud to be a Cal student most of the time, right? Okay? You're proud to be a woman or man most of the time. You derive self-esteem from that. You derive self-esteem from being your own individual. We talked about that kind of self-esteem already. But here we're talking about self-esteem that's bound up with your social identities, that's bound up with being an American, with being a Cal student, with being a psych major. So there's different portions of self-esteem. And just as we strive to feel good about ourselves as individuals, social identity theory argues that we want to feel good about ourselves as group members too. And if that's the case, well, one explanation they argued for why we favor the in-group over the out-group is giving things to our in-group, giving them an advantage, evaluating them more favorably, saying they're more persuasive, they're smarter, they're better looking, they're going to succeed more in life. All these favorable things shines well on us, reflects well on us. Okay, it makes us feel better about being a part of that group. Okay, increases that portion of our self-esteem that is bound up in our group membership. I'll give you a chance to finish the slide. So here's a really simple study looking at this idea. Participants in the study were once again divided into minimal groups, this time on the basis of whether they like the right painting or the left painting. Okay, these are both modern abstract paintings. Who cares which one you like? Well, you're the type of person who likes the right one. You're the type of person who likes the left one. We've got our in-group, out-groups formed in the lab. Half the participants are then given a chance to allocate points to fellow participants in the experiment, some of whom are in-group members, some of whom are out-group members. And like in the experiment I just told you about with underestimators and overestimators adults, they show the standard in-group favoritism effect. The other half of participants read a newspaper during this time. They didn't get the chance to exhibit in-group favoritism. All participants' self-esteem was subsequently measured, and consistent with the idea that in-group favoritism boosts your own self-esteem, your self-esteem bound up in your group memberships, the first group of participants who actually got to allocate these meaningless points to their group reported higher self-esteem afterward. Whereas those who didn't get a chance to say, go in-group, okay, they didn't show that boost in self-esteem. Okay, really straightforward sort of demonstration. One demonstration of how self-esteem might be involved in in-group favoritism. Yeah?
But just a general question, what happens if you are put in a group that you would consider your out group? So like that old timeless thing of being chosen for kickball team, you see this group is like the one you want to be in, but you have to go to the team you really don't want to go to. Like what kind of dissonance does that create? How does that affect?
Yeah, that's a good question. What does that remind me of? That kickball example is pretty specific, but it would be like, I guess a broader thing would be you sort of want to be a member of a group that's not accepting you and you're more accepted to the other one. Yeah, I think that's a tough call. Like, what's going to win out? You know, your need to feel good about yourself, and so maybe you will reduce dissonance and start derogating the group you wanted to be part of. It's a tough call. Do you guys know of anything? I cannot think of anything relevant to that. I don't think there's one established theory. I could see both things happening. Or I think social psychologists would, the typical prediction would be you would come to love the group that you're part of over time. Because there is a need to feel okay and a need to feel a sense of belonging. That would be probably the more likely prediction. But I could see other factors, making, like maybe there's an opportunity to move to the other group, there's still a chance later on, like the next gym class, and you're not going to, form any ties here. Right, exactly. It's an interesting question. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, you do feel that in-group out-group thing, but I think it depends on the circumstances. One of the things you should take away from this class, and I know you all know this, but I'm going to articulate it out loud, is that how you feel is going to depend on the surrounding context at that moment. So, whether you feel an in-group thing to your working class versus a non-working class, it depends on if you're surrounded with a lot of working class people or not. Let me give an easier example. My gender identity and my discriminating against men versus women is going to be more likely in contexts where me being a woman is more salient. So I often give the example of being the only female in a conference room of men. In that circumstance, I'm going to be more likely to think about myself as a woman and think about other women, my in-group versus the out-group, and so be more prone to perhaps show in-group favoritism. But if I'm a room full of women or a mixture of women and men, that in-group, out-group distinction based on gender might not be that salient. And so you can't say I will always discriminate against men in favor of women. It depends on the social environment. So back to your example, I may be born working class but strive to be, a 1%er someday. And will I show discrimination against 1%ers? Maybe. It depends on the context. Will I, try to distance myself from my fellow working class people? Maybe sometimes you will, maybe sometimes you won't. It depends on the social context, the other comparison groups in the context. And that is actually a really big part of a theory I just told you about social identity theory. But if this is really interesting to you, first of all, you'll take Rudy's class, Stigma and Prejudice, but there's a theory that was an offshoot of this social identity theory called self-categorization theory. I know it sounds so blah, 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 like social psychology terms, but it is a theory that inherently says that how you categorize yourself in a given moment in terms of in-group, out-groups is completely dependent on the makeup of the context. And that in the extreme, they even argue that we don't have stored social identities, because social identities are constructed anew given this context that you're in. Okay, I don't buy that. I think that's extreme. I know I'm a woman, regardless of the context, I have an identity, it's stored away, but they would argue in the extreme, it's constantly shifting based on the context. Yeah?
Is there a correlation between who chooses the leader and who's best at boosting the self-esteem, or basically best at making the group stronger?
Okay, there's definitely research on that. For example, there is. I want to say that more prototypical group members who represent the group are more likely to be perhaps rise in leadership, but there's also evidence that more cooperative people may rise, contrary to what you might think. So there's a bunch of evidence that has to do with that, but I don't know of any evidence having to do with boosting self-esteem, although those things are probably correlated with that. Okay, we will pick up on this in our last lecture, where we will transition to talking about how do we reduce prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination.